Japan began releasing millions of tons of nuclear wastewater into the Pacific. Will it affect the ecosystem and exported fish who live there? We'll tell you what nuclear watchdogs say. And our planet continues being hit with once-in-a-lifetime storms multiple times in our lifetime. A new AI storm tracker will be able to track these with pinpoint accuracy like never before. And the oldest piece of our past could give us a glimpse into the future. How NASA is pulling clues from space. Hello and welcome to EarthX News. We are dedicated entirely to sustainability and the environment. I'm your host, Christina Thompson. Here are some of the biggest headlines facing our planet that we're following. Japan started releasing treated wastewater from the damaged Fukushima nuclear plant into the Pacific waters off their coast. Since the 2011 tsunami severely damaged the plant, more than 1 million tons of treated wastewater has built up. They just began the 3-decade-long process of releasing it after getting the okay of approval from the UN nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency. Now, the plan has been controversial in Japan and neighboring countries who engage in seafood export. China, for instance, cut 67% of their fish import from Japan once the release began, costing the Japanese fishing industry $20 million. And lead researcher with Safecast, an independent nuclear watchdog, told the New York Times the health risk posed by the released water will be very low and a magnitude of thousands of times lower than everyday exposure to radiation. But the entire process has not been transparent enough. Japan researchers say they have been meticulous about sampling fish before and after the release and have not found any detectable amounts of radionuclides in the fish surrounding the Fukushima plant. The Japanese government has been timely and effectively updating the world on the release, saying, so far, so good. And artificial intelligence might be the answer to curbing some of the devastation and lives lost during catastrophic natural disasters. A new AI machine improves the predictive power of hurricane models and paints a more accurate picture of how fast they can intensify, helping keep countless people out of danger. Pacific Northwest National Laboratory developed a machine that detects relationships between hurricane behavior and climate factors like heat stored in the ocean, wind speed, and air temperatures. Their algorithms then generate predictions about potential paths the storms might take, how strong they will likely be, and how quickly they can intensify, all without the potential for human error. And a new satellite over Europe aims to understand weather patterns better than ever before, preventing mass amounts of casualties we've seen from recent severe weather events worldwide, like the wildfires in Maui and flooding in Pakistan and Libya. The European Space Agency launched their Meteosat third-generation satellite in 2022, and they just got back the data they were hoping for: detailed images of weather patterns over Europe and Africa. Now, the level of detail in these images was unachievable over Europe and African in geostationary orbit until now. Researchers are hopeful these remarkable images will bring a new era in the forecasting of severe weather events. And researchers in Japan developed a new laser-based sampling system for studying ice cores of glaciers. Similar to how rings on a tree trunk tells us the tree's age, ice cores can actually tell us a lot about the climate during specific periods in time by tracking their growth. Before this laser technology, scientists could not pull samples from the deepest and oldest locations within a glacier. Now, they can pinpoint annual temperatures from thousands to hundreds of thousands of years ago. With help, scientists will better understand climate change in the past and present. And making history. After years of anticipation and hard work by NASA, we now have the world's first collected asteroid sample of rocks and dust. Take a listen.
We see
CDL milestone. We have confirmed parachute deployment.
unexploded ordnances, UXOs.
Recovery operations.
The capsule from asteroid Bennu touched down in Utah and was helicoptered to a clean room setup away from earthly contaminants. The asteroid is one of the oldest in our solar system. Scientists say it will help us better understand planet formation and the origin of organics and water that first started life on Earth. According to the United Nations, the science is clear. To avoid the worst impacts of climate change, emissions need to be reduced by almost half by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050. Regardless of the source, the energy requirements of the planet are increasing and will need to be met somehow. One of the tools providing a clean energy solution is wind turbines. But regardless of the green energy development, some environmentalists are not on board. They oppose the project because of debates over offshore wind farms' impacts on whales in the region. Whale strandings in the Northeast are not new, but they are happening more and more often. The first offshore wind turbine in the Northeast began operating in 2016, when the whale death uptick started. Here with me to share her findings and hypothesis, the co-chair for the Wildlife for the Energy and Community Coalition and the founder of Save Right Whales Coalition, Lisa Lenoz. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on the show. Before we get into what's happening to the whales, I first wanted to ask you, do you think that wind energy has a place in our energy plans, and should it be utilized in the right conditions?
That's a big question. Wind energy, in a large respect, is an ancillary source of generation simply because it's entirely reliant on the weather. So we cannot run the United States economy on wind or solar and renewables in general. So it has a place, but not as large as what the public has been led to believe.
Okay. And I know that you recently worked on a documentary. It argues that wind turbines could be behind the whale deaths. Can you explain what you guys found?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not the wind turbines yet. We only have about 7 operating turbines in the United States right now, but it's the pre-construction work that is happening offshore, where they're conducting sonar surveys to identify the subsurface, what the land is under the water, in preparation for development. And it's that process that we believe is causing the whales to die.
So there's a huge debate about this right now in the media. We know the federal government, the wind farm companies, a lot of scientists, they've said that they definitively can't point to the turbines as the whale killer culprit. NOAA sent out a statement saying that the wind farms certainly are affecting the whales, but not killing them. I know you were just saying that it's not the wind farms yet. Why do you think that it could get potentially worse for whales?
Oh, because what's happening right now is that this precursor is a small piece of what we're going to have when the projects are actually operational. The level of noise that is being produced in the water at this point is significant. And what we did in our investigations, we actually had a 2-pronged investigation. And we found both temporal and spatial correlation between the whale deaths and the activity within the wind lease areas, meaning that at the same time and at roughly the same place, the whales were dying when the boats were active. Then we went back further and we looked at the noise itself. We had an acoustician went out there and actually measured the noise levels. And what we found was shocking. And that, we believe, is what's killing the whales. The noise is enormous. It's not being mitigated properly, and the whales are getting too close to the sound.
Interesting. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on, for sharing your report and your findings. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Our next guest is pointing to a different culprit behind the whale deaths: climate change and shipping lanes. Regina Asmudas-Silvia, the executive director at Whale and Dolphin Conservation in North America. Regina, thank you so much for coming on, for sharing your expertise. I wanted to ask, in your opinion, what is causing these whale deaths?
Based on the information that's available, based on the ability to do the necropsies and the examinations, most of the animals that have been examined have evidence of vessel strikes. We've seen a number of species that have had a change in distribution as a result of a change in climate and changing prey bases, where they're going to go look for food, where they're finding food. There's been some fishery management changes that have led to an increase in abundance of menhaden, the small schooling fish, particularly in the mid-Atlantic and the New York Bight area. And we don't know how whales find their food, but they're good at it. So there have been an increase in the number of whales going into that area looking for food. There is an increase in activity. It's not a place that we would have probably had management measures previously because that area wasn't considered to be a high-use area for a lot of different whale species in the past. And so seeing more whale watching happening in that area regularly was another indication of the fact that whales are being sighted there on a more consistent basis. And more whales in an area, particularly in a place that has a lot of boat traffic, is unfortunately going to lead to issues where you're going to have vessel strikes.
Is there anything else that you can point to other than boats, entanglement, relocation because of climate change that you can blame for the whale deaths?
I mean, I think that it's really important for people to understand that it's not really super simple to always know why a whale died. These animals are warm-blooded animals. They are encased in a thick blubber layer. They start to decompose the second they die, and they're not dying on the beach. They're dying somewhere at sea, starting to decompose before the currents bring them up onto the beach. At that point, there are some really skilled stranding responders in the mid-Atlantic area in particular that are going out and trying to examine these carcasses. And a post-mortem on a large whale is a lot of work, and it's not something simple to do once the tissue starts to decompose. So when they do these postmortems and they're looking inside of whales, they're looking for things like, is there bruising, are there broken bones, are there evidence externally on signs of entanglements, are there ligature marks, are there cases of disease. They're looking at organs if they're intact enough to be able to examine them, doing histology, trying to figure out if there's parasite loads. You know, the question of ears has come up quite a bit, and the small hairs that are on the ear decompose almost instantly after those animals are, die. So it's not so simple to have a carcass wash up on the beach and do the extensive exams that I think some of the public think that are possible. So where those exams can occur and what they can find in those cases have, in that particular area, really have been pointing to vessel strikes.
Obviously, a lot goes into this, but we do appreciate you coming on and sharing your expertise. Regina Esmuda, Sylvia, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Mark your calendars because World Whale Day is February 18th next year. This event started in Maui in the 80s to bring focus to whale conservation. From giant mammals to tiny mollusks, learn how oysters are being used to clean our waterways. That's next on EarthX News. Rebuilding our harbors, one oyster at a time. The Billion Oyster Project is making it their goal to restore oyster reefs in the New York harbor. To date, they've returned 100 million oysters to the harbor and collected 2 million pounds of oyster shells with the help of 11,000 students and volunteers. Here with me to dive deeper into the benefits of this project is the Billion Oyster Project Director of Development, Brian Rager. Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show. First of all, can you explain to everyone what the Billion Oyster Project is?
Sure, yeah, and thank you so much for having me today. As it says on the tin, on the front end is we are trying to put 1 billion oysters back into New York Harbor. So if you think about New York Harbor, it's helpful to think about it being too cold for coral reef. But the oysters were basically our coral reef. In fact, that they're the coral reef of every ecosystem north of Virginia. So we are trying to put 1 billion back in the water because that is basically what will it take to recreate that original population. And then it'll bring all the other wildlife and biodiversity back with it. The fish and the crab and the dolphins and the seals and everything we think about in terms of abundant ocean biodiversity is what is started by the oyster itself. So that's the first thing that we're doing. And then the second thing is we're hoping to engage 1 million New Yorkers in this process. We do that by working in over 100 public schools around the city, offering free STEM education activities on the waterfront for hundreds of classrooms to come down, learn about the oyster, learn about its world, and how their role in students' day-to-day actions have a real impact on their environment around them.
That's really cool. And I know that I read a little bit about it, not only will it improve the water ecosystem, but it's actually going to help our shorelines as well. Can you touch on that?
Absolutely. So, you touched on one thing that the oyster does. That, an adult oyster at 3 years will clean 50 gallons of water a day. So 1 billion oysters is actually enough to clean the entirety of New York Harbor every 3 days. We've currently restored 136 million oysters to date, which is enough to clean basically the water body of the Chrysler building every single day. So that gives you kind of a filtration impact. But more than that, our shoreline used to be protected by these three-dimensional oyster reefs. Unlike scallops or clams that also filter the water, oysters actually grow on top of each other and create that three-dimensional reef structure. And studies have shown that oyster reefs in the wild reduce wave attenuation or wave force between 60 and 80%. So when you think about massive superstorms kind of coming into New York Harbor, Superstorm Sandy is a great example, right? We had these massive waves battering the shoreline. Oyster reefs historically would have been providing that protection. And so that's what we're building for now is, restoring shoreline through this kind of natural resilience layer.
You guys are very popular, so popular that you even had a celebrity visitor. Prince William came to look at what you guys are doing. That is so cool.
One of the cool things about what I get to do every day is just the amazing amount of public support we get. Everyone from, school students to 80-year-olds that I meet at weddings have a general understanding of what we do. But Prince William was certainly one of the really most interesting experiences. We really appreciated that the Kensington Palace and the Prince himself remained interested, remained, excited for this opportunity to come out. And, we were absolutely honored to get 2.5 hours and show him our work. He met with students, he met with our staff, he saw the oyster reefs up close, and we hope that he left with a real understanding of what we're trying to do in New York City.
What was his verdict? What did he think about what you all were doing?
I think he liked it. He got a hat on, which we heard was a pretty rare feat to get him dressed up in the gear. But I think the most meaningful factor was, the next day he invited our executive director, Pete Malinowski, to attend the EarthShot Summit, which is, the Prince's Foundation's keystone environmental kind of grant giving mission. But it's really just also a way to get kind of like the people who are in the philanthropic and corporate space to start thinking about some amazing solutions that are being grown by nonprofits and for-profits around the world. And, inviting us into that room, I've been in a lot of rooms in New York City. I've been around a lot of people, but I was pretty blown away when I was standing next to a Bloomberg daughter and she couldn't get a seat. So that was a pretty cool room to be in.
Well, Ryan Rager, thank you so much for coming on, for talking with us about your Billion Oyster Project. It's awesome what you all are doing for the New York harbors.
Thanks for coming out. And listen, we're on the water 5 days a week. So if you're ever in New York City, we'd love to take you out and show you an oyster reef.
I would love that. Thank you for the invite.
Yeah. Cheers, guys.
And a few more details on what Brian was just talking about. Prince William visited New York for 2 days during Climate Week, a summit on climate action that takes place alongside the United Nations General Assembly. His first stop was to a pile of shells on Governor's Island, donated by New York's finest dining establishments in solidarity with the Billion Oyster Project. Now, after returning some oysters to the harbor, he met with the UN Secretary General and announced his finalists for the EarthShot Prize, an award by the climate-focused charity that he founded in 2020, which gives the winner a £1 million prize to continue their environmental work. The winner will be announced at the EarthShot Prize ceremony in Singapore on November 7th. Coming up, the challenges to becoming a green city. Europe hopes to be a world leader in the transition to clean energy, making a pledge to the European Green Deal. It's a strategy to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. Now, one of those initiatives requiring automakers to cut 100% of carbon emissions in new cars sold in the European Union by 2035. That's according to the new law, making it impossible to sell new cars powered by fossil fuels. Here in the U.S., California passed similar legislation banning the sale of gasoline-powered cars by 2035, and New York swiftly followed. But some European countries are now learning that implementing climate-friendly policies is oftentimes easier said than done. Foreign correspondent Alex Salvi has more on the early obstacles to reducing emissions.
A transportation revolution is underway in Europe. Leaders banning cars in city centers in an effort to ease traffic and curb greenhouse emissions. Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Paris, all drastically reducing the number of vehicles on the streets in exchange for bicycles and walking paths. The trend beginning in Spain's Pontevedra in 1999, when cars were banned in most of the city, a move that reduced air pollution by nearly 70%. Over 20 years later, and similar low-emission zones are on the rise, increasing by 40% in Europe since the start of the COVID pandemic. But some countries are having a hard time implementing such policies, while others are challenging the premise of the idea altogether. The dilemma is playing out in the German capital of Berlin, a city that was moving towards outright banning cars in the city center, but began to run into problems during the execution of the plan. The Christian Democrat Party controls Berlin for the first time in over 2 decades, largely due to its opposition to emission-free zones. It ran on a platform of walking back what it described as unfair mobility restrictions for citizens, and is quickly acting on its campaign promise. Vehicles are returning to areas once labeled as car-free, and bike path projects are being put on hold pending additional review. It's a blatant rebuke to newly implemented climate-friendly policies, with voters rejecting the architects in a February election and conservative leaders giving the people the power to address the issue themselves. It's an approach gaining popularity across Europe, most recently being applied on a larger scale in the United Kingdom. The UK is scrapping a ban on gas cars, which was set to go into effect in 2030, but is now being pushed back to 2035. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak maintains that the country must find a way to fight climate change without penalizing consumers and workers, something he believes can happen absent additional regulation.
But I also think that, at least for now, it should be you, the consumer, that makes that choice, not government forcing you to do it.
But its failure to overcome the first hurdle has some questioning if the ambitious goal is realistic, and if so, how it can best be achieved. In Rome, I'm Alex Salvi.
Alex Salvi, thank you for that report. Some big cities here in the U.S. are looking for ways to cut back on the number of cars each day, but there are already places here where cars are not allowed. Halibut Cove, Alaska, one of the world's only floating towns. Supai, Arizona, the nearest road is 8 miles away. Mackinac Island, Michigan, you can get around on foot, bike, or horse. Fire Island, New York, the only way there is by passenger ferry. Bald Head Island, North Carolina, golf carts okay, cars are not. Tangier Island, Virginia, known for soft shell crabbing. And Governor's Island in New York Harbor, where you get a great view of the Statue of Liberty. That's it for this edition of EarthX News. Please join us again next week. I'm Christina Thompson.